The thunder of hooves echoed in Katherine Foster's ears as she tumbled from the stagecoach, her body hitting the dusty ground with a sickening thud. The last thing she saw was the coach disappearing over the horizon, leaving her alone in the vast, unforgiving wilderness of Nebraska Territory, 1867. Katherine awoke to the sensation of being watched. Her head throbbed and the taste of copper lingered in her mouth. Dust covered her once fine traveling dress, now torn at the sleeve. She attempted to sit up, only to fall back with a gasp of pain. That's when she saw him, a tall figure on horseback, silhouetted against the setting sun. "Madam, you're hurt," the man said, dismounting with fluid grace. His voice was deep, with the slightest hint of a southern drawl. "What in God's name are you doing out here alone?" Katherine tried to speak, but her throat was parched, her lips cracked from hours in the merciless sun. The stranger knelt beside her, gently lifting her head and offering his canteen. "Small sips," he instructed. His face came into focus as she drank, weathered from years under the sun, with kind eyes the color of polished amber. A day's worth of stubble darkened his jawline, and his dark brown hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "The stagecoach," she managed to say between sips. "There was a robbery. They threw me out when I refused to give up my mother's locket." The stranger's expression darkened. "Those Yellow Gulch boys, I reckon. They've been hitting coaches along this route for months." He carefully examined the gash on her forehead. "I'm Jake Yates. My ranch is about 5 miles east of here. Can you ride?" Katherine attempted to stand, only to have pain shoot up her ankle. "I don't believe I can, Mr. Yates." Jake nodded, seemingly unsurprised. "Then I'll have to carry you, Miss Foster, Katherine Foster. I was bound for North Platte. My uncle is expecting me." Jake's expression changed slightly at the mention of North Platte. "That's still a day's ride from here, Miss Foster. You're in no condition to travel that far." He whistled, and his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, trotted over. "We'll get you to my place, patch you up, and I'll send word to your uncle tomorrow." Before Katherine could protest, Jake had lifted her into his arms with surprising gentleness for a man of his size. She winced as he placed her atop his horse, then mounted behind her. "Hold on to the pommel," he instructed, his chest warm against her back as he reached around her for the reins. "Whiskey knows the way home." As they rode, Katherine fought to stay conscious, the rhythmic movement of the horse nearly lulling her to sleep despite her pain. Jake kept one arm securely around her waist, steadying her when the terrain grew rough. "Stay with me, Miss Foster," he murmured when her head lolled back against his shoulder. "We're almost there." Through half-closed eyes, Katherine saw a modest ranch house come into view, nestled in a small valley with a creek running nearby. Several outbuildings dotted the property, and a small herd of cattle grazed in a distant pasture. "Welcome to Cottonwood Ranch," Jake said as they approached. He whistled sharply, and the front door of the house swung open. An older woman with silver-streaked black hair hurried out, her expression changing from curiosity to concern when she saw Katherine. "Jake Yates, what trouble have you brought home now?" the woman demanded, though her tone held no real reproach. "Found her abandoned about 5 miles west, Maria. Stagecoach robbery." Jake carefully dismounted, then lifted Katherine down. "She needs tending." Maria clicked her tongue disapprovingly as she assessed Katherine's injuries. "Bring her inside. I'll heat water for a bath and find something for those cuts." The interior of the ranch house was simple but comfortable, with handcrafted furniture and colorful woven blankets adorning the walls. Jake carried Katherine to a small bedroom off the main living area, setting her gently on a bed covered with a patchwork quilt. "Maria was my mother's housekeeper," Jake explained as the older woman bustled in with cloths and a basin of water. Now she mostly stays to make sure I don't live like a complete savage." "Someone has to," Maria retorted, shooing him away. "Go tend to your horse and fetch the doctor's kit. This young lady needs privacy." Jake nodded, his eyes meeting Katherine's briefly. "You're safe here, Miss Foster. I'll send a rider to North Platte at first light to notify your uncle." After he left, Maria helped Katherine out of her ruined traveling dress and into a clean nightgown that smelled of lavender and sunshine. The older woman worked efficiently, cleaning Katherine's cuts and binding her sprained ankle. "How did you come to be thrown from a stagecoach, child?" Maria asked as she applied a pungent-smelling salve to the gash on Katherine's forehead. "Bandits," Katherine replied, wincing at the sting. "4 men on horseback. They stopped the coach about 10 miles back. The other passengers surrendered their valuables, but I—" She touched the locket hanging around her neck. "This was my mother's. It's all I have left of her. I couldn't give it up." Maria's expression softened. "So they tossed you out like garbage, animals." She tucked the quilt around Katherine. "Rest now. You're safe at Cottonwood Ranch. Jake Yates is many things, but above all, he's an honorable man." Katherine wanted to ask more about her rescuer, but exhaustion pulled at her like a physical weight. The last thing she remembered before drifting off was Jake returning to check on her. His tall frame silhouetted in the doorway, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. When Katherine awoke the next morning, sunlight streamed through the small window beside her bed. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was or how she'd gotten there. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back: the stagecoach, the bandits falling through air before hitting the hard ground, and Jake Yates finding her. She attempted to sit up, grimacing at the stiffness in her muscles. Every part of her ached, but her head felt clearer than it had the night before. A soft knock at the door preceded Maria's entrance. The older woman carried a tray with a steaming cup and a bowl of something that smelled delicious. "Good, you're awake," Maria said, setting the tray on a small table beside the bed. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Like I've been thrown from a stagecoach," Katherine replied dryly, earning a chuckle from the housekeeper. "At least your humor survived. That's a good sign." Maria helped Katherine to sit up, propping pillows behind her back. "I've brought you some coffee and porridge. You need to eat to regain your strength." Katherine accepted the cup gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma before taking a sip. "Has word been sent to my uncle?" Maria nodded. "Jake sent one of his ranch hands to North Platte at dawn. If all goes well, your uncle should receive word by this evening." She paused, studying Katherine's face. "Jake mentioned you were traveling alone. That's unusual for a young woman." Katherine stared into her coffee cup. "My parents died last winter influenza. Uncle Herbert is my only remaining family. He's been in North Platte for years, running the mercantile there." "I'm sorry for your loss," Maria said softly. "It's a hard thing to be alone in this world." The door opened again, and Jake entered, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. The morning light revealed details Katherine had missed the previous day: a small scar above his right eyebrow, the way one corner of his mouth lifted slightly higher than the other when he smiled. "Good morning, Miss Foster," he said, keeping a respectful distance from the bed. "I'm glad to see you awake. How are you feeling?" "Better than I expected," Katherine admitted. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Yates. I don't know what would have become of me if you hadn't come along." Something flickered in Jake's eyes, anger perhaps, at the thought of her abandoned fate. "No thanks necessary. Any decent man would have done the same." He cleared his throat. "I've sent Hector to North Platte with news of your situation. Your uncle should know you're safe by nightfall." "How soon can I continue my journey?" Katherine asked, though the thought of leaving the safety of Cottonwood Ranch filled her with unexpected anxiety. Jake and Maria exchanged glances. "That ankle needs at least a week of rest," Maria said firmly. And those bruises won't fade any faster if you're bouncing around in another stagecoach. Maria's right, Jake added. There's no rush. You're welcome to stay until you're properly healed. Besides, the next coach doesn't come through until next Tuesday. Katherine wanted to protest, but knew they were right. She was in no condition to travel, and the thought of another stagecoach journey so soon after her ordeal made her stomach clench with fear. "Thank you," she said simply. "I'll try not to be a burden." Jake's expression softened. "You're no burden, Miss Foster. Rest today. Tomorrow, if you're feeling up to it, perhaps Maria can help you out to the porch for some fresh air." After Jake left to attend to his ranch duties, Katherine spent the day drifting in and out of sleep, her body demanding rest to heal from its trauma. Maria checked on her regularly, changing the dressing on her head wound and bringing her a light dinner of rabbit stew and fresh bread. As promised, the next day Maria helped Katherine dress in a simple calico gown that had belonged to Jake's mother and supported her as she hobbled to the porch. The air was crisp and clean, scented with pine from the distant foothills and something sweet that Katherine couldn't identify. "Wildflowers," Maria explained when Katherine commented on the pleasant aroma. "There's a whole field of them just beyond that rise. In another week or so, they'll be at their peak." Katherine settled into a rocking chair, her injured ankle propped on a small stool. From this vantage point, she could see much of Cottonwood Ranch, the barn where Jake was currently working with one of his men, a corral where several horses grazed, and beyond that, pastureland that stretched toward distant mountains. "It's beautiful here," she murmured, almost to herself. Maria smiled knowingly. Jake's father chose this land for its beauty as much as for its practical value. The creek never runs dry, even in the hottest summers, and the valley offers protection from the worst winter storms. Katherine watched as Jake emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a cloth. He looked up, spotting her on the porch, and raised a hand in greeting before heading in her direction. "You look better today," he said as he approached, taking off his hat and running a hand through his hair. "How's the ankle?" "Still tender, but improving," Katherine replied, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look. "Your ranch is lovely, Mr. Yates. Jake, please." He leaned against the porch railing, his gaze taking in the same view she'd been admiring. "It's not much compared to some of the bigger spreads, but it's home." "How long have you been here?" Jake's expression grew wistful. "My father built this place after the Mexican War. I was born right here in this house 28 years ago." He paused. "Lost my parents to a fever 6 years back. Been running things on my own since then, with Maria's help and a few good men." Katherine felt a connection in their shared loss. "I'm sorry about your parents. It's not easy, is it, moving forward when they can't come with you?" Jake studied her face, seeming to recognize the understanding in her eyes. "No, it's not, but we do it anyway because there's no other choice." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a rider Hector, Katherine presumed returning from North Platte. Jake excused himself to meet the ranch hand, leaving Katherine to wonder about the message from her uncle. She didn't have to wonder long. Jake returned to the porch, his expression troubled. "I'm afraid I have some news, Miss Foster, Katherine." He sat in the chair beside her. "Your uncle received our message, but he's currently away on business in Omaha. His clerk says he won't return for at least 3 weeks. Katherine felt her heart sink. 3 weeks? But where am I to stay until then? Jake's response was immediate. "Here, of course. You're welcome at Cottonwood for as long as needed." "I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition," Jake interrupted gently. "The room you're in has been empty since my mother passed, and frankly, Maria would be delighted to have another woman around the place." Katherine hesitated. Staying at the home of a man, She barely knew even one as seemingly honorable as Jake Yates was hardly proper. Yet what choice did she have? Her ankle would take time to heal, and she had nowhere else to go until her uncle returned. "Thank you," she finally said. "I accept your hospitality, and I'll find some way to repay your kindness." Jake's smile warmed his amber eyes. "No repayment necessary, though if you're determined, Maria could probably use help with the mending. She claims my attempts make her eyes hurt." Katherine laughed, surprised by how natural it felt after days of pain and worry. "I'm quite handy with a needle. Consider it done." As the days passed, Katherine found herself settling into the rhythm of life at Cottonwood Ranch. Her ankle grew stronger, allowing her to move around the house with the aid of a walking stick Jake had carved for her. True to her word, she helped Maria with household tasks, mending shirts, preparing meals, and even attempting to teach the older woman how to make her mother's famous apple cake, though the ranch's primitive oven made it a challenging endeavor. Jake was often busy with ranch work, but he made time each evening to sit with Katherine on the porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Their conversations ranged from childhood memories to books they had read to their hopes for the future. Katherine found herself looking forward to these quiet moments more than anything else in her day. A week after her arrival, Katherine was helping Maria hang laundry when they heard the sound of approaching horses. Jake had ridden out early with two of his men to check on a distant part of his herd, so Katherine was surprised when she looked up to see him returning with a stranger, a well-dressed man who sat uncomfortably in his saddle. "Katherine," Jake called as they approached. "This is Dr. Pearson from North Platte. I thought he should have a look at that ankle of yours." Dr. Pearson turned out to be a kindly older gentleman who examined Katherine's injuries with professional efficiency. "The ankle is healing nicely," he pronounced, "though I'd advise against any long journeys for another week at least. The head wound concerns me more. Any dizziness or blurred vision?" Katherine shook her head. "Not since the first day." "Good, good." The doctor repacked his bag. "You were fortunate, Miss Foster. Falls from moving vehicles can be fatal, and equally fortunate that Mr. Yates found you when he did." After examining Jake's ranch hand, Hector, who had been kicked by a horse the previous day, Dr. Pearson accepted the offer to stay for dinner. As they ate Maria's savory beef stew, the doctor shared news from North Platte. "Those Stagecoach bandits struck again yesterday," he said, buttering a piece of bread. "But this time, they met with resistance. The coach was carrying a U.S. Marshal who wasn't inclined to surrender his sidearm. Shot one of the bandits clean through the shoulder." Jake leaned forward. "Did they catch any of them?" Dr. Pearson shook his head. "The wounded man's companions carried him off, but the Marshal got a good look at them. Says one was a fellow called Sela's red nasty piece of work with a price on his head in 2 territories." Katherine felt a chill run through her at the name. "One of the men who attacked my coach had a red beard and a scar across his chin. His companions called him Sela's." The table fell silent as everyone absorbed this information. "Did he see your face clearly?" Jake asked, his voice tight with concern. Katherine thought back to that terrifying moment. "I don't think so. He wore a bandana over his face and I kept my head down until—" She trailed off, remembering the rough hands that had dragged her from the coach and the sickening sensation of falling. Jake's jaw clenched. "All the same, it's best if you remain here until your uncle returns. If Red is still in the area and learned you survived, he might want to ensure you can't identify him." The thought had not occurred to Katherine, and she felt a fresh wave of fear. "Surely he wouldn't come looking for me." "Men like Red don't take chances," Dr. Pearson said grimly. "Jake's right, you're safer here than in town, at least until the law catches up with that gang. That night, Katherine found sleep elusive. Every creak of the house settling, every whisper of wind through the cottonwoods outside her window seemed ominous. When she finally dozed off, her dreams were plagued by faceless men on horseback pursuing her across an endless prairie. She awoke with a start to find early morning sunlight streaming through her window. Determined not to let fear rule her day, Katherine dressed in the blue calico dress that Maria had altered for her and made her way to the kitchen to help with breakfast. To her surprise, Jake was already there, seated at the table with a cup of coffee and a worried expression that cleared somewhat when he saw her. "You're up early," he remarked, rising to pull out a chair for her. "I could say the same for you," Katherine replied, noting the shadows under his eyes. "Did you sleep at all?" Jake shrugged. "Enough. I've asked Hector and Tomas to take turns keeping watch for the next few nights, just as a precaution." Katherine felt a pang of guilt. "I've brought trouble to your door." "No," Jake said firmly, reaching across the table to cover her hand with his. "The trouble was already out there. You're just an innocent caught up in it." His touch was warm, calloused from years of ranch work, yet gentle. "I won't let any harm come to you, Katherine. You have my word." Something in his voice made Katherine look up, meeting his gaze. What she saw there sent a flutter through her chest. Concern. Yes, but something more. Something that mirrored the confusing feelings that had been growing within her own heart. The moment was broken by Maria's entrance. The housekeeper took one look at their joined hands and raised an eyebrow, but said nothing as she began preparing breakfast. The next few days passed without incident, though Katherine noticed that Jake never ventured far from the house and always kept his rifle close at hand. Despite the undercurrent of tension, she found herself growing more comfortable at Cottonwood Ranch and more drawn to its owner. Jake, for his part, seemed equally affected by her presence. Katherine often caught him watching her when he thought she wouldn't notice, his expression a mixture of admiration and something that looked almost like longing. In those moments, she would feel a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the summer heat. 10 days after her arrival, Katherine was sitting on the porch, a pile of mending in her lap when Jake approached with a strange expression on his face. "Would you like to see something?" he asked, offering his arm. "It's not far, but we'll take it slow for your ankle's sake." Curious, Katherine set aside her sewing and accepted his support. Jake led her past the barn and corral to a small rise beyond, where a breathtaking sight awaited. The wildflower field Maria had mentioned was in full bloom, a riot of blue, yellow, and purple blossoms stretching as far as the eye could see. "Oh," Katherine gasped, momentarily forgetting the proper decorum that had been instilled in her since childhood. "It's beautiful." Jake smiled at her reaction. "I thought you might like it. My mother used to bring me here when I was a boy. Said God painted the prairie just to remind us that beauty can thrive even in the harshest places." Katherine took a few steps into the field, her fingers brushing against the delicate petals. The scent was intoxicating, sweet and earthy, and somehow reminiscent of home, though her childhood in Philadelphia had been surrounded by brick and cobblestone rather than open sky and wildflowers. "Thank you for sharing this with me," she said softly, turning to find Jake watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Katherine," he began, then hesitated, as if weighing his next words carefully. "I know we've only known each other a short time, but the crack of a rifle shot cut off his words, followed by the distinctive buzz of a bullet passing too close to their heads. Jake reacted instantly, pulling Katherine down into the tall flowers and covering her body with his own. "Stay down," he whispered against her ear, already drawing his revolver from its holster. Another shot rang out, this one striking the ground just feet from where they lay concealed. "Yates!" A harsh voice called from the direction of the tree line about 100 yards away. "Send out the woman and we'll let you live." Jake's expression hardened. "Seal is red, I presume," he muttered, then raised his voice. "You're trespassing on my land, Red. The lady stays with me." A cruel laugh floated across the field. "Have it your way. We'll just kill you and take her anyway." "Can't have her identifying us to the marshal, now can we?" Katherine clutched at Jake's arm. "There are at least 3 of them," she whispered urgently. "I recognize the voices." Jake nodded grimly. "And we're pinned down with no cover except these flowers." He glanced back toward the ranch house, which was just visible over the rise. "Maria would have heard the shots. She'll send help, but it might not arrive in time." Another bullet whizzed overhead, closer this time. The bandits were advancing, using the trees for cover. "I need to get you out of here," Jake said, his eyes scanning their surroundings. "There's a dry creek bed about 30 yards to our right. If we can reach it, we can follow it back toward the ranch." "I'll slow you down," Katherine protested, acutely aware of her still healing ankle. Jake's gaze met hers, fierce and determined. "I'm not leaving you. We go together or not at all." The sincerity in his eyes left no room for argument. Katherine nodded, gathering her skirts to make movement easier. "On your signal." Jake fired 2 quick shots in the direction of their attackers, then grabbed Katherine's hand. "Now!" They ran in a crouch through the wildflowers, bullets kicking up dirt around them as Red and his men returned fire. Katherine's ankle protested with each step, but fear and determination propelled her forward. They had almost reached the creek bed when Katherine felt a searing pain across her upper arm. She stumbled, nearly falling, but Jake's strong arm around her waist kept her upright. "You're hit," he said, his voice tight with concern as he helped her down into the relative safety of the shallow ravine. "Just grazed," Katherine assured him, though the wound burned like fire and blood was soaking through the sleeve of her dress. "Keep moving." Jake ripped a strip from his bandana, wrapping it tightly around her arm to stem the bleeding. His expression was grim, but there was something else there too, a fierce protectiveness that made Katherine feel safe despite their dire situation. They moved as quickly as Katherine's injury and the rough terrain allowed, following the winding creek bed toward the ranch. Behind them, they could hear Red and his men crashing through the undergrowth, gaining ground. "There's no time," Katherine gasped, her strength beginning to fail as blood loss and pain took their toll. "You should go ahead, bring back help." Jake's response was immediate and vehement. "Not a chance." He paused, assessing their situation. "There's an old trapper's cabin near here. We might be able to hold them off until my men arrive." He helped her up a steep embankment, then through a stand of pine trees to a small, dilapidated cabin that blended so well with its surroundings, Katherine would have missed it entirely if not for Jake's guidance. The interior was dusty and sparse, just a rough table, a couple of 3-legged stools, and a narrow cot against one wall. Jake barred the door behind them, then moved quickly to the single window, checking the approach. "They're still coming," he reported, breaking open his revolver to count his remaining bullets. 4 shots left. Make that count for something." Katherine sank onto one of the stools, fighting against the lightheadedness that threatened to overcome her. "Jake, if we don't. That is, I want you to know how grateful I am, not just for today, but for everything." Jake turned from the window, crossing to kneel before her. His hands, so capable and strong, were gentle as they took hers. "Katherine, listen to me. We're going to make it through this. And when we do, there's something I need to tell you, something I should have said days ago." The emotion in his eyes stole her breath. "What is it?" Before he could answer, a voice called from outside. "We know you're in there, Yates. Send out the woman and we'll let you walk away." Jake's jaw tightened as he moved back to the window. "There are 3 of them," he told Katherine quietly. "Red and 2 others. They're spreading out to surround the cabin." Katherine's mind raced. 3 bandits against 1 man with 4 bullets and a wounded woman. The odds were not in their favor unless— "Jake," she whispered, an idea forming. "Does this cabin have a back way out?" He glanced at her sharply. "A trapdoor to a root cellar. Why, if you create a distraction, I could slip out the back, draw their attention away from you." Jake's expression darkened. "Absolutely not. I'm not using you as bait." "Not as bait," Katherine insisted. "But if they think I've escaped, they might split up to search for me. That would give you a better chance. And leave you alone in the woods with at least 1 armed bandit hunting you." Jake shook his head. "I can't risk it, Katherine. I can't risk you." The raw emotion in his voice made her heart skip. Before she could respond, a bullet splintered through the window frame, sending both of them diving for cover. "That's your last warning, Yates," Red shouted. "Send her out, or we burn the cabin with both of you in it." Jake and Katherine exchanged glances, the gravity of their situation settling over them like a physical weight. They were trapped, outnumbered, with limited ammunition, and Katherine's injury slowing them down. Just as Jake was preparing to return fire, a new sound reached their ears: horses approaching at a gallop, accompanied by shouts that weren't coming from Red or his men. "The ranch hands," Jake breathed, relief evident in his voice. "They've found us." The ensuing gunfight was brief but intense. From their vantage point inside the cabin, Jake and Katherine could only listen as shots were exchanged, men shouted, and horses whinnied in terror. Then, suddenly, silence fell. "Jake, you in there?" A familiar voice called Hector, one of Jake's most trusted hands. "We're here." Jake responded, moving to unbar the door. "Katherine's wounded." Moments later, the door swung open to reveal Hector and 3 other ranch hands, all armed and looking grim but triumphant. "Red's dead," Hector reported without preamble. "One of his men, too. The 3rd surrendered. Tomas has him tied up on his horse. We'll take him to the sheriff in North Platte." Jake nodded, then turned his attention immediately to Katherine. "We need to get her back to the ranch. She's lost blood." The journey back to Cottonwood Ranch passed in a blur for Katherine. She was vaguely aware of being lifted onto Jake's horse, of his strong arms holding her securely as they rode, of his voice murmuring reassurances against her hair. By the time they reached the ranch house, Maria was waiting on the porch, her face lined with worry. The housekeeper took charge immediately, directing Jake to carry Katherine to her room and sending one of the hands to fetch clean water and bandages. "The bullet just grazed her," Jake explained as Maria examined the wound. "But she's lost a fair amount of blood." Maria nodded, her experienced hands already cleaning the injury. "She'll be fine with rest and care. You did well, Jake. Now go clean up and let me tend to her properly." Jake hesitated, his gaze lingering on Katherine's pale face. "Go," Maria insisted gently. "She's safe now, you both are." After Jake reluctantly left the room, Maria helped Katherine out of her blood-stained dress and into a clean nightgown. As the older woman bandaged her arm, Katherine found herself thinking about the look in Jake's eyes just before they'd been interrupted in the cabin. "He cares for you," Maria said softly, as if reading her thoughts. "I've never seen him so worried about anyone." Katherine felt a blush warming her cheeks. "We barely know each other." Maria's smile was knowing. "Sometimes the heart recognizes what it wants faster than the mind can catch up." She finished securing the bandage. "There, now rest. The body heals best when it's still." Despite Maria's advice, Katherine found sleep elusive. Every time she closed her eyes, she relived the terror of bullets flying around them, of Jake's body shielding hers, of the moment she felt the burning pain in her arm. She must have dozed off eventually, because she awoke to find the room bathed in the golden light of sunset and Jake sitting in a chair beside her bed, his head bowed as if in prayer. "Jake," she murmured, her voice raspy from sleep, his head snapped up, relief flooding his features. "Katherine." "How do you feel?" "Better," she said, though her arm still throbbed dully. "What happened with the bandit who survived?" "Sheriff's got him locked up in North Platte," Jake replied. "He's already confessed to the Stagecoach robberies, including yours. Apparently they thought you were dead when they left. You never expected you to survive to identify them." Katherine shuddered at how close that had come to being true. "If you hadn't found me." "But I did," Jake said firmly, taking her hand in his. "And I thank God for that every day." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "Katherine, back at the cabin before we were interrupted, I was about to tell you something important." Her heart began to race, and not from fear this time. "Yes." "I know it hasn't been long," he continued, his amber eyes earnest, "but these past 2 weeks have shown me something I never expected to find. When I saw you injured today, when I thought I might lose you." He took a deep breath. "Katherine Foster, I'm falling in love with you. I know it's soon, and I know you have plans to join your uncle in North Platte. But I had to tell you before." Katherine cut off his words by placing her free hand against his cheek. "Jake Yates, I believe I'm falling in love with you too." The smile that illuminated his face was like the sun breaking through clouds after a storm. He leaned forward, hesitating just a breath away from her lips, giving her the chance to pull away if she wished. Instead, Katherine closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that was soft and sweet and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, Jake rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he whispered. "Not just until your uncle returns. Stay here at Cottonwood, with me." The answer came easily, as if her heart had known all along where it belonged. "Yes, I'll stay." 2 weeks later, Katherine stood on the porch of Cottonwood Ranch, watching as a familiar figure approached on horseback. Her arm was healing well, the bandage replaced with a simple dressing, and her ankle had all but forgotten its previous injury. "Is that him?" Jake asked, coming to stand beside her, his hand resting comfortably at the small of her back. Katherine nodded as she recognized the rider. "That's Uncle Herbert." Herbert Foster proved to be a robust man in his late 50s with a kind face and the same blue eyes that Katherine had inherited from her mother, Herbert's younger sister. After dismounting and embracing his niece with evident relief, he fixed Jake with an appraising stare. "So you're the man who saved my Katherine," he said, extending his hand. "I owe you a debt I can never repay, Mr. Yates." Jake shook the offered hand firmly. "No debt necessary, sir. Finding Katherine was the greatest blessing of my life." Herbert's eyebrows rose at the obvious affection in Jake's voice. "Is that so?" He glanced between the two of them, noting the way they stood close together, the way Katherine's eyes softened when she looked at Jake. "I see. Well, I came to bring you back to North Platte, Katherine, but it appears your plans may have changed." Katherine took Jake's hand, drawing strength from his steady presence. "Uncle Herbert, Jake has asked me to stay at Cottonwood, as his wife." Her uncle didn't seem particularly surprised by this announcement. Marriage is a serious step, especially to a man you've known so briefly. "I know," Katherine agreed, "but sometimes life presents us with unexpected paths. This is the one I choose to follow." Herbert studied her face, then nodded slowly. "Your mother always said you had good judgment. If this is what you want, you have my blessing." He turned to Jake. "Though I expect you to make an honest woman of her properly, young man. No rushed business." Jake's smile was warm and sincere. "I intend to do everything properly, sir. Katherine deserves no less." That evening, After Herbert had been shown to the guest room and the house had settled into nighttime quiet, Katherine and Jake sat together on the porch swing, his arm around her shoulders as they watched stars appear in the darkening sky. "Your uncle seems like a good man," Jake observed. "He is," Katherine agreed. "He was kind to come all this way instead of simply sending for me." Jake was quiet for a moment, then asked the question that had been on his mind. "Are you sure about staying? North Platte has more to offer than Cottonwood shops, society, comforts." Katherine turned to face him, her expression serious in the fading light. "What North Platte doesn't have is you, Jake Yates, and that makes all the difference." She took his hand, placing it over her heart. "Home isn't a place. It's where you feel safe, where you feel loved. You gave me both from the moment you found me." Jake's kiss was tender, filled with all the emotions words couldn't adequately express. When they parted, he brushed a strand of hair from her face with gentle fingers. "I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret that decision." The wedding took place 6 weeks later, a simple but joyous affair held under the cottonwood trees that gave the ranch its name. Reverend Thomas from North Platte performed the ceremony, and it seemed as if half the territory had turned out to witness the union of Jake Yates and Katherine Foster. Maria had outdone herself preparing food for the celebration, and Herbert Foster had insisted on providing wine from his mercantile. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the ranch yard, guests danced to fiddle music played by one of Jake's hands who had a surprising talent for it. "Mrs. Yates," Jake murmured as they swayed together to a slow tune. "How does it sound?" Katherine smiled up at her husband, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain all she felt. "Like the most beautiful name in the world." As twilight descended, the guests gradually departed, some to return to North Platte with Herbert, others to neighboring ranches and homesteads. Maria, with Herbert's help, shooed the newlyweds toward the main house while she supervised the cleanup. "Your wedding gift is on the bed," she told Katherine with a wink. "Something old, something new, you know the tradition." In their bedroom, now truly theirs, Katherine found a beautiful quilt spread across the bed. Looking closer, she realized it was pieced together from scraps of her mother's dresses that she had brought with her, combined with new fabric in colors that complemented the room perfectly. "Maria made this?" she asked, running her fingers over the fine stitching. Jake nodded, his expression soft as he watched her. "She worked on it every night after you went to bed, said every new bride deserves something special to start her married life." Katherine felt tears welling in her eyes. "It's perfect." Jake crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "Are you happy, Katherine?" "Truly." Instead of answering with words, she reached up to pull his head down to hers, pouring all her love and certainty into a kiss that left them both breathless. Later, as moonlight filtered through the bedroom window, Katherine lay in the circle of Jake's arms, her head resting on his chest where she could hear the steady beat of his heart. "I never told you what I was thinking when I found you that day," Jake said softly, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "What were you thinking?" she asked, tilting her head to see his face. "That you were the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen, even covered in dust and half-conscious." He kissed her forehead. "And that God must have had a reason for putting you in my path." Katherine smiled, remembering her own first impression of him, a tall, strong figure silhouetted against the setting sun, like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known she was making. "I think he did," she whispered. 1 year later, Katherine stood on the porch of Cottonwood Ranch, watching as riders approached in the distance. At her side, Maria fussed with the table they had set for lunch, arranging flowers freshly picked from the wildflower field where Katherine and Jake had faced danger and acknowledged their feelings for each other just over a year ago. "Is that them?" Maria asked, squinting toward the horizon. Katherine nodded, her hand unconsciously moving to rest on her slightly rounded belly. Jake and Uncle Herbert, right on time. The past year had brought many changes to Cottonwood Ranch. With Herbert's business acumen and investment, Jake had expanded his cattle operation, making the ranch one of the most prosperous in the territory. The old trapper's cabin had been rebuilt into a proper line shack for the hands to use during roundup. The main house had gained a new wing, with a larger kitchen for Maria and a small library filled with books Katherine had ordered from back east. But the most significant change was the one growing within Katherine, their first child, due to arrive when winter gave way to spring. As the riders drew closer, Katherine could make out Jake's familiar form, tall and straight in the saddle. Even after a year of marriage, the sight of him still made her heart beat faster. Beside him rode her uncle, who had become a frequent and welcome visitor to the ranch. Jake spotted her on the porch and raised his hat in greeting, urging his horse to a faster pace. When he reached the yard, he dismounted in one fluid motion and strode toward her, his face lighting up with the smile he reserved only for her. "How are my two favorite people?" he asked, placing one hand on her belly and the other at the small of her back as he kissed her. "We're well," Katherine assured him, leaning into his embrace. "Your son has been particularly active today." Jake's eyes widened. "Son, did the doctor say something while I was gone?" Katherine laughed. "No, just a feeling I have, though it could just as easily be a daughter with her father's restless spirit." Herbert joined them on the porch, embracing his niece warmly. "You're looking radiant, Katherine. Motherhood agrees with you, even in advance." Over lunch, the men shared news from North Platte, a new railroad spur being planned, the capture of the last member of Sela's Reds gang who had been hiding in Wyoming Territory, the arrival of 3 new families looking to settle in the area. "Sheriff asked after you," Herbert told Katherine as Maria served apple cake for dessert. "Says you're still the only woman he knows who survived being thrown from a stagecoach and lived to tell the tale." Katherine smiled, thinking of how that terrible day had led to the greatest happiness of her life. "I had help," she said, her gaze finding Jake's across the table. That night, after Herbert had retired to the guest room and Maria to her quarters, Katherine and Jake stood together on the porch, watching as stars appeared in the vast Nebraska sky. Jake's arms encircled her from behind, his hands resting gently on the swell of their child. "I was thinking," he said, his breath warm against her ear, "about names." "Oh," Katherine leaned back against his chest, content in his embrace. "If it's a boy, what would you think about naming him after your father?" Katherine turned in his arms, touched by the suggestion. "James Yates. It has a nice sound to it." She placed a hand against his cheek. "And if it's a girl," Jake smiled, covering her hand with his own. "I thought perhaps Elizabeth, after my mother, but with your middle name, Rose, so she carries both our families with her." "Elizabeth Rose Yates," Katherine tested the name aloud. "It's beautiful." As they stood there under the star-filled sky, Katherine marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the terror of being thrown from a stagecoach and abandoned, to the security of Jake's love and the promise of their growing family. "What are you thinking about?" Jake asked, noting her contemplative expression. "About fate," she replied. "How the worst day of my life led me to the best." Jake's arms tightened around her. "I thank God every day that I found you." "And I thank God that you did," Katherine whispered, reaching up to kiss the man who had rescued her in more ways than one, the man who had given her not just a home, but a heart to call her own. As spring bloomed across the Nebraska plains, Katherine gave birth to a healthy son with his father's amber eyes and his mother's determined spirit. They named him James Herbert Yates, honoring both Katherine's father and her uncle, who had become like a second father to Jake over the past year. Standing by the bedroom window with his newborn son cradled in his arms, Jake watched as the first wildflowers began to dot the distant field where he had almost lost Katherine, and where he had found the courage to admit his love for her. "I have a story to tell you, son," he whispered to the sleeping infant, "about how your mother was thrown from a stagecoach and left behind, and how finding her was the greatest blessing of my life." From the bed, Katherine watched her husband and son silhouetted against the spring sunshine, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain. The journey that had brought her to Cottonwood Ranch had been fraught with danger and uncertainty, but she wouldn't change a moment of it. For it had led her home to Jake, to their son, to the life she was meant to live beneath the vast Nebraska sky, where love had found her when she least expected it and needed it most. And in the years that followed, as Cottonwood Ranch prospered, and their family grew to include a daughter, Elizabeth Rose, born 2 years after her brother, Katherine often thought of that fateful day when fate had tossed her from a stagecoach and into the arms of the man who would become her heart's true destination. Life on the frontier was never easy, but with Jake by her side, Katherine faced each challenge with courage and grace. Together, they built a legacy of love that would endure long after the Wild West had been tamed, a testament to the unexpected ways in which life's greatest hardships can lead to its most profound joys. And it all began with a fall, a rescue, and 2 hearts finding their way home to each other under the boundless prairie sky.